Tuners push the limits of what is capable on factory components, often doubling the output of the engine, installing beefier transmissions to withstand the unrelenting forces of torque, bigger brakes and sway bars, wild-looking aero, but ultimately still recognizable as the underlying vehicle. But what happens when the tuner doesn't start with a vehicle? They start from scratch. Then you get the Saleen S7, a car that would beat Ferrari at its own game, but subsequently vanish. Welcome to Forgotten Legends. In the 80s, if you wanted more performance out of your Mustang, a small tuning company out of Southern California named Saleen Autosport had you covered. Steve Saleen could, what we would say, make a racehorse out of a mule, turning Fox body Mustangs into canyon carvers and over-the-top cosmetic treatments which fit in right into the 80s era. More impressive than his road cars was his race cars. By 1997, Saleen would win their third SCCA manufacturer title in their Mustangs, and it was time for Saleen to enter the big leagues, Le Mans. Mustangs were absent from Le Mans for 30 years, last being seen in 1967 in Shelby GT350 trim, and Saleen would mark the return with their SM95 chassis race car. Two-thirds through the endurance race, their Mustangs would suffer electrical and suspension failures, ultimately retiring them prematurely. While in the pits, Steve Saleen admired the McLaren F1 GTR longtails that were in the adjacent garage, and it would be the inspiration for Saleen's most ambitious project, and one that would blur the line between tuner and boutique manufacturer. Phil Frank, who was a design consultant for Saleen, used CAD, or computer-aided design software, to bring the S7 to life, and in his own words, it was the first production car to be developed completely on the computer with no full-size model ever made. British racing house Ray Mallock Limited engineered the tube chassis and the suspension and aerodynamics, and the S7 could generate downforce equal to the car's weight of 2,750 pounds at 160 miles per hour. Bill Talley, who developed the race engines for the Saleen Allen Speed Lab race cars, developed a bespoke engine block for the S7 based on the 351 Windsor engine, but bored and stroked to 427 cubic inches, or 7 liters, hence the 7 in the Saleen S7 name. This engine was all aluminum, featuring a billet 4340 steel crankshaft and connecting rods with forged aluminum pistons, giving an 11:1 compression ratio. The roof-mounted intake flowed into a cold air box and into a fabricated aluminum intake manifold with 8 individual runners, which fed CNC ported cylinder heads with the Saleen logo milled into them. The output was 550 horsepower at 5,900 RPM and 560 pound-feet of torque at 4,000 RPM with a 6,500 RPM redline, which was high for an overhead valve engine design, but still shy 1,000 RPM from its European dual-array cam counterparts. The S7 debuted at Laguna Seca Raceway in California on August 19, 2000, with a very short development time thanks to many contractors involved in its inception. Even though it boasted the Saleen name, it was a very well orchestrated effort from many parties, and when the press got a hold of the S7, they absolutely raved over it. Even though it was slightly underpowered, and I use this term loosely when compared to its contemporaries, the lightweight 2,750 pound S7's power to weight ratio and close ratio 6-speed RBT transaxle could out-accelerate the Ferrari Enzo in the quarter mile and pull more G's on the skid pad. Even more impressive was the S7R race car, which structurally was virtually identical to the street chassis, with the difference being the arched roof structure for headroom in the street car and the supports in the cockpit. A total of 14 S7Rs were completed, with the early units being built by Ray Mallock in England with Roush-based V8s, which suffered some issues predominantly engine-related. Later, the Saleen-built S7Rs used Payne's V8s, which were much more reliable. This led to one of the biggest upsets in racing history on September 8, 2004 on Ferrari's home track in Imola, Italy. Vitaphone Racing Team and their All-American S7Rs would take the overall win against 2 Maserati MC12s, 2 Lamborghini Murcielagos, 3 Ferrari 550 and 575s in the GT class. Even Fiat's chairman Luca di Montezemolo would state, "We were no match for the Saleen today." The S7's reign of terror would reach new levels with the help of twin turbochargers. The S7 twin turbo would debut in 2005 with the same 7-liter Windsor architecture but slightly smaller bore of 4.12 inches to increase cylinder wall thickness for reliability. Installed were two Garrett GT3582R turbochargers, which a lot of people don't know. The S7 twin turbo is non-intercooled, so the boost is restricted to only 5.5 pounds of boost, and intakes are now carbon fiber to feed the turbos and the engine. The twin turbo adds 200 pounds over the prior S7, but also gains 200 horsepower for a 750 horsepower output at 6,300 RPM with a supposed 250 mph top speed. It also added $160,000 more over the S7's $395,000 price tag, all the way up to $555,000 MSRP. A year later, you could option a competition package that would raise boost levels to 8 PSI and make 1,000 horsepower. Theoretically, on paper, it was king amongst 95% of its contemporaries, other than the likes of the Bugatti 16.4, and this was from a Mustang tuner, let's not forget. So why did the S7 just go under the radar, it seems? Well, the problem wasn't the S7, it was Saleen Automotive itself. Saleen planned to sell 50 S7s in 2004, but could only manage to move 8 of them due to the price. The S7 twin turbo was more expensive than the Carrera GT, the SLR McLaren, and equal to the Enzo, but without the prestige of those brands. Saleen's real moneymaker was the Mustangs, and the competition from Ford SVT with the new GT500 and Roush packages would eventually take market share. The Saleen S281 packages fell from 1,600 units being sold in 2006 to only 370 units being sold in 2008 as the recession loomed overhead. As cash ran dry and debt piled up, subsequently Steve Saleen got ousted from his own company, and Saleen Automotive was desperate for an S7 successor. There were attempts at building a successor to the S7, which first was the Saleen S5S Raptor, a 5-liter supercharged E85 burning mid-engine supercar, making 650 horsepower and drastically less than the S7 at $185,000. It was unveiled at the 2008 New York Auto Show, and then absolutely no follow-up to it. The Saleen S1 was another attempt and aimed at the Chinese market, and currently is still at a standstill since 2017. The Saleen S7 is more of a David versus Goliath story. This first attempt from a small tuner in Southern California blossomed into a Le Mans 24-hour win, 10 GT championships, and 78 wins worldwide. It embarrassed Ferrari at its own track. It had McLaren F1 top speed, but ultimately, the nail in the coffin was Saleen Automotive itself.